Hey, welcome to Next Level Method Podcast. I'm Richard Ryerson.
And I'm Matt Lilly.
And we're here to help you take your life to the next level. Let's get started. Well, Dr. Gundry, welcome to the show. So nice to meet you.
Hey, thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
You know, there's so many things to talk about and so limited in time to talk about. One of the things that I'm really interested about, because you got a new book about particularly dealing with energy. I tell you, that's something I battle, me and my wife struggle with all the time. I mean, particularly as I'm in my 50s now, and it just seems like, you know, I used to look back at my dad when he was in his 50s and he's coming on the weekend and he's instantly takes a nap. And I'm like, why is he always napping? And I get it now. I love naps. Naps are my favorite thing. Yeah. So welcome. Let's talk about energy.
Okay.
Or lack thereof.
Or lack thereof, yeah. Interestingly, I actually work 7 days a week. I don't take a day off. I see patients actively 6 days a week, even on the weekends, Saturdays and Sundays. And on Fridays, I'm at my supplement and food company, Gundry MD in LA. And I go back and forth between Palm Springs and Santa Barbara, where my two clinics are. And so I work 7 days a week. And I'm 71 years old. And I guess if you had asked me when I was 50 if I would be working 7 days a week, I'd say, are you crazy? I'll be retired and enjoying my sedentary lifestyle. But I actually have far more energy at 71 than I did at 50. And when I was 50, I was professor and chairman of cardiothoracic surgery at Loma Linda University in Southern California Medical Center. And I was famous for doing baby heart transplants, which we talked about off camera, and also for operating on people who nobody else wanted to operate on. There's a few of us idiots who would do that. And I was obese, despite running 30 miles a week, going to the gym 1 hour a day and eating a healthy low-fat diet. I had arthritis, migraine headaches, high cholesterol, high blood pressure, pre-diabetes, and I thought that was pretty normal for a 50-year-old guy because my father was the same way,
right?
You mentioned. And I had the opportunity to be sent a patient from Miami, Florida by the name of Big Ed, who I call Big Ed. And this guy had inoperable coronary artery disease at age 48. You couldn't do anything for him. You couldn't put stents in him because there was too much crud. You couldn't do bypasses because there wasn't any place to land bypasses. Everything was filled up with crud. And he, like many other people, went around the United States looking for idiots like myself to operate on him. And he went to about 5 different centers, and everybody told him the same thing. Nope, can't help you. Go away. Good luck. And so he came to me, kind of the last stop, and I looked at his angiogram, the movie of his heart, and I said, I'd love to help you, but I got to agree with everybody else. Nothing we can do. And he said, well, here's the deal. I've been on a diet for the last 6 months after this diagnosis, and I've lost 45 pounds. Now, he was 265 pounds when I met him, hence the name Big Ed. And he said, I went to a health food store and I bought all these supplements. And he literally had this big giant shopping bag of supplements. And he says, maybe I did something here in my heart. And I'm scratching my professor beard and going, well, good for you, Ed. I'm glad you lost that weight, but that's not going to do anything in here. And I know what you did with the supplements. They made expensive urine, which is what I firmly believed back then.
Expensive urine.
And he said, well, come on, I've come all this way. Why don't we get a new angiogram of my heart, a new cardiac catheterization? I went, okay, don't get your hopes up. Well, in 6 months' time, this guy had cleaned out 50% of the blockages in his heart.
No way.
Yeah, 50%. Gone. And I'd never seen anything like it. I'd never been taught that was possible. And long story short, I asked him to describe the diet that he was on. And it turns out, as an undergraduate at Yale University back in the dark ages, I, like many others of my ilk, were allowed to design our own major. And I had a thesis that I had to defend, which was you could take a great ape, manipulate its food supply, manipulate its environment, and prove that the only thing that could possibly happen is you'd have a human being. And I actually defended my thesis and got an honors and gave it to my parents and went off to become a famous heart surgeon. So Big Ed is telling me about this diet, and I went, wait a minute, time out. That's my thesis. And I called my parents and I said, hey, do you still have my thesis? It's actually here in my cabinet. And they said, yeah, it's in the shrine. Send it up to me. So right. I actually lost 50 pounds my first year on my program, and I lost another 20 pounds since then and kept it off for over 20 years. And then I looked through his supplements, and I'm very famous for keeping hearts alive for heart transplant and keeping hearts alive in bypass surgery. And I use this concoction of, for lack of a better word, supplements that I was putting down the arteries and veins of hearts. And it never occurred to me to swallow these things. And Big Ed was swallowing these things. So I started swallowing a bunch of supplements. And long story short, all my issues went away. My arthritis went away. My migraine headaches went away. My prediabetes went away. So I would start patients who I operated on my program with the idea that I would never have to operate on them again, that they wouldn't reclog up all their arteries. And lo and behold, their high blood pressure went away, their cholesterol issues went away, their arthritis went away. And so after about a year of doing this at Loma Linda, I realized that I'd made a mistake in that I shouldn't operate on people and then teach them how to avoid me.
Right.
I should teach them, how to eat, and then I wouldn't have to operate on them. Now, for a heart surgeon, that's a very poor career choice.
Yes, exactly. That's what I was thinking. I was like, that's working yourself out of a job right there. That's what that's doing.
And so, so I actually resigned my position at the height of my career.
Wow.
And set up a clinic in Palm Springs and now in Santa Barbara, where I literally still do, teach people how to eat. And I would treat them, as I still do, as a research project. And I get blood work on them every 3 months that Medicare and insurance pays for. And we could see and document what would happen to these people and publish the results at national and international meetings. And now about 80% of the people I see actually now have autoimmune diseases that nobody can figure out. And we do extremely well with autoimmune diseases. And so, that's what I do. And the big book of 4 years ago was The Plant Paradox, where I basically said that there are a lot of healthy foods that are actually the cause of most of our illnesses. And that was certainly not my original idea. Hippocrates, the father of medicine, said 2,500 years ago that all disease begins in the gut. And he was absolutely right. We didn't have the sophisticated tests that we have now, and how he knew this is just one of the most amazing things I can conceive of. But now I paraphrase him in that all disease begins in a leaky gut. And if you had asked me 15 years ago what I thought about leaky gut, I would have told you it's pseudoscience. But in fact, leaky gut is real. It underlies all diseases. Period. You got a disease, you got a leaky gut. If you're tired, you got a leaky gut.
What is a leaky gut? Like, I mean, I've heard the term, but I be honest, I really don't know
what it is,
what that means.
Yeah. Well, so your intestines inside of you, all coiled up, is the same surface area as a tennis court. So when we're watching the U.S. Open, I want you to imagine that there is actually a tennis court inside of you. in terms of the surface area. And we have a weird, yeah. And everybody looks down and goes, no, there's no tennis. But there is. And the problem with this tennis court is the lining of our gut is only one cell thick. And those cells are the only thing that keeps everything you swallow away from the insides of you. And these cells are actually held together. You appear old enough to remember Red Rover.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure.
You know, it's now illegal to play in school because it's much too dangerous.
Really? I didn't know that.
Story. So anyhow, in Red Rover, you know, we've all locked our arms and the kids run across and try to break through. So these cells are locked arm in arm with what are called tight junctions that basically glued together. And what's been learned a lot through the work of Dr. Alessio Fasano, who's now at Harvard, we learned that certain compounds, primarily in plants, gluten, for instance, is one of these compounds, is capable of breaking the locked arms that hold these cells together. And so if there's a break, we now have a space where these compounds can actually get through the wall of our gut, or compounds of undigested food, or actually bacteria can get through the wall of our gut. Now, why that's important is that 80% of all of our immune cells, our white blood cells, are lined up right behind the wall of our gut because, quite frankly, that's where mischief can come through. 80% of all of our immune system lives in our gut waiting for trouble. And so when we have leaky gut, or the fancy name is intestinal permeability, but leaky gut's a lot easier to think about.
Yeah.
Our immune system gets literally hyperactivated. And it's always looking for trouble, number one. And it turns out the immune system, if we think about them as our troops, as our soldiers, require huge amounts of energy to do battle with these invaders. And one of the reasons I got interested in why none of us have any energy anymore is because of this immune system need to use huge amounts of power to do battles with things they're actually not supposed to be needing to do battle with. Let me give you a great example. Recently had on my podcast, the Dr. Gundry podcast, Duke researchers who had an interesting hypothesis. And there's still a few hunter-gatherers that exist in the world. And one of the more famous one is a tribe called the Hadzas in Tanzania in Africa. And these guys are very fit. They're thin. They're very healthy. The men walk 8 to 10 miles a day, hunting big game with poison-tipped arrows. The women walk 4 to 5 miles every day, digging up tubers, gathering berries, and they don't have any chronic diseases. And so these researchers said, gee, I'll bet you these guys are so healthy because they burn up tons of energy walking and doing all this stuff. And we ought to compare their energy expenditure with desk workers here in the United States. And I'll bet you we're going to find that the Hadzas, burn much more energy than the desk workers. And that's why the Hadzas are so skinny. And that's why the desk workers are so fat. And lo and behold, when they did that, they found, to their chagrin, that the desk workers were burning as much energy as the people who were walking 8 to 10 miles a day. Now, as a researcher, when sometimes our hypothesis doesn't work, we, rather than reject our hypothesis, we say, well, our hypothesis is right, but we all have the exact same energy expenditure no matter what we do, and goodbye. And I went, wait a minute, that doesn't pass the sniff test. And what happens is that the desk workers all, quite frankly, have leaky gut. Here in the United States, most everyone has leaky gut. And so our energy expenditure, which would normally go to our muscles, which would normally go to our brain, which is quite frankly an energy hog, goes to our immune system to fight this chronic inflammation. And one of the reasons that our get up and go is got up and gone is we are chronically fighting this, fire of inflammation that's literally using all of our energy. And what we find in my practice is that when we teach people how to eat, their leaky gut seals, and then their immune system quiets down, doesn't need the fuel, and people's brain fog lifts, their energy levels, restore, and it's really fun to watch, and that's actually why I still see patients 6 days a week, because
fascinating.
You can watch this happen.
It makes perfect sense. It's fascinating to me.
Yeah, it is.
That I was going to ask, well, how do you know if you have a leaky gut? But I'm assuming most of us probably do, based on the stuff that we eat. And that's the challenge. I can't. And every time I know me and my wife want to eat better. It seems like it's so much work, though, and it is work because I go to the store and everything is processed. Everything has corn. It's corn-based, corn syrup in it, and I know that triggers a lot of inflammation. Right? I've seen those graphs where, back in the 30s, my grandparents were using lard and butter to cook, and they didn't have near the heart disease that we have now, because everything's, that's hard processed, that corn, right? Am I saying that right?
Yeah, that's part of it. And I talk about this in the book. About 70% of all the food we eat nowadays is processed or ultra processed food. And that's the other factor that goes into why we have no energy. Number one is we have leaky gut. But number two, we actually, there's little energy producing organelles in most of our cells called mitochondria. Mm-hmm. And most of us probably remember in high school biology that the mitochondria were the powerhouses of the cell.
Right.
And the mitochondria are what actually take sugars or proteins or fats and convert them into ATP, our energy currency that we spend. And normally, when our grandparents and great-grandparents were around, they would eat, believe it or not, whole foods.
Crazy.
They would eat,
Is that right?
They would eat them whole.
Oh my gosh. That sounds crazy. Is this?
Yeah, can you imagine?
Oh my Lord. Yes.
And so what happens is normally we break down sugars in starches like a potato slowly, but then sugars arrive in our mitochondria for processing first. Then the proteins that we would eat whole proteins, like the steak, for instance. Mm-hmm. Here I'm a Midwest guy like yourselves. Mm-hmm. And, I like steak as much as anybody, as long as it's grass-fed, grass-finished, but that's another story. Mm-hmm. And our grandparents, guess what, ate grass-fed,
grass-finished, because they raised the cows, right?
So the protein arrives next, actually many hours later. And then finally, fats arrive actually way later. But what's happened to all of us now is our foods have been so highly refined that the proteins, sugars, and fats arrive simultaneously for processing at our mitochondria. And I live in the LA area, and I can tell you that is like rush hour traffic in LA. Mm-hmm. You have all these food substances arriving for processing, and what happens is literally nothing gets done because you jam the system full of these things that were never supposed to happen simultaneously.
Right.
And one of the most amazing things is that people eat these energy bars and energy drinks, And the next thing you know, you want to take a nap in the afternoon, and you go, what the heck? I just had an energy bar. And it's because our mitochondria are actually in rush hour and can't produce any energy, and traffic doesn't move. So those are the two big factors that have happened in our lives. The other huge factor that I talk about in all my books is broad spectrum antibiotics. Normally, we have hundreds of trillions of bacteria in our gut that are called the microbiome. And these guys actually, we now know, teach our immune system to, chill out, don't get so excited. And these guys actually eat a lot of the harmful substances that we swallow. Your great-grandparents had these guys aplenty. But beginning in the mid-70s, when I was in medical school, broad-spectrum antibiotics were introduced, and they were miraculous. But we didn't know that broad-spectrum antibiotics kill off our entire gut microbiome. It's literally like a forest fire. It's like throwing napalm in our gut. And we feed all of our animals these broad spectrum antibiotics to make them grow faster and to keep them from getting sick in our feedlots. And so, unbeknownst to us, most of us have literally killed off probably the most important organ in our body, and that's our microbiome. And they're everywhere. They're in our chickens, they're in our beef, they're in our pork. We still consume huge amounts of antibiotics. If you got a sniffle or a scratchy throat, your doctor gives you an antibiotic, even though it's not going to work because these are viruses. So those are big deals. In fact, interestingly, millennials are the first generation that have been continuously exposed to antibiotics in their food. They've never not been exposed to them. And they've been continuously exposed to Roundup, which is glyphosate. And most people don't know, but the Monsanto Corporation patented Roundup as an antibiotic, not as a weed killer.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Wow.
And Roundup's in everything now. It's sprayed on everything. And so millennials, one of the buzzwords to describe millennials is they are the lazy generation. And I think it has nothing to do with them being lazy, but they are really the first generation that's been continuously exposed to conditions that promote leaky gut. And no wonder they're so tired.
So, interesting thing that you said too about the plant that I'd ever heard is that you're saying though there's some of this plant-based stuff kind of breaks some of these barriers, right?
Yep.
That's what type of plants? Like, what am I eating that I thought was healthy that is taking some of these walls down?
Yeah, that was the subject of my first monster bestseller, The Plant Paradox, the hidden dangers in healthy foods. So plants do not want to be eaten. They were here first. They had a really good before animals arrived. They don't want their babies eaten, their seeds, but they can't run, hide, fight, but they're chemists of incredible ability. So they equip themselves and their seeds with defense mechanisms against being eaten that try to convince the predator, us, that maybe it wouldn't be a good idea to eat this particular plant or this plant seed. And what I became interested in is lectins. Lectins are sticky proteins that actually Dr. Fasano proved pry open these sticky parts in our gut.
Right.
Gluten is the most famous of the lectins, but lectins are present in all grains. Corn, for instance, has plenty of lectins. The only grains that don't have lectins are sorghum and millet. And a great number of us in the Midwest know sorghum. and we feed it to our cows, but we're much better off eating it ourselves. So the nightshade family, potato, right, eggplant, tomatoes, peppers, even goji berries are nightshades. Then there's a couple of nuts that are not nuts. Peanuts and cashews are actually not nuts. And then the bean family, kidney beans, navy beans, lentils are loaded with lectins. Now, there's good news. Our great-grandparents knew how to detoxify lectins. So for instance, let's take wheat for an example. Most of the mischievous lectins are in the hull of wheat. And isn't it surprising for the last 10,000 years that we've been growing wheat, that people have been trying to take the hull off of wheat and eat wheat white. The Italians could not possibly consider whole wheat pasta. The French would certainly not consider a whole wheat croissant because they have been for generations taking the bad part out of wheat. And only in the last 50 years has whole wheat goodness started to destroy our health. Just as an example,
Wow.
my mother's mother, my grandmother, was French, and she taught my mother that you had to peel and de-seed tomatoes before you could eat them because everyone knew that the peel and seeds of tomatoes were toxic. And in fact, I grew up eating peeled and de-seeded tomatoes, and we could not make tomato sauce without peeling and de-seeding tomatoes, nor would an Italian ever think about doing that. And that's correct. Interesting fun fact, Americans did not eat a tomato until 1886 because we knew that they were toxic. And a judge in a suburb of Philadelphia decided, he took out an ad in a newspaper and said he was going to kill himself by eating a bushel of tomatoes on the courthouse step. And he didn't die. And so that's actually what started Americans eating tomatoes for the first time.
And so all of this is fascinating.
Yeah.
Right? And I've studied health and in the healthcare industry, you know, I've got some nursing home facilities, long-term care facilities. I'm around physicians all the time. And, you know, have a registered dietitian that worked for us and another in a health, and she probably knows some of this. She's really forward thinking.
Probably not.
Well, she's more forward thinking. Okay. I don't listen to her enough. I'll put it that way. But but really, so all of this is in essence, if I'm to break it down in layman's terms for myself, all of these things that we're consuming that we think are good, or not all of them, but a lot of what you've just said are actually attacking our gut. Is that the summary of that? Is that I love a garden grown tomato. My mom grows tomatoes, right? We're in Kansas, so I cut up that tomato and eat it, and I think it tastes delicious. But what you're telling me is that's probably not the best thing for me.
Yeah, I can't tell you the number of people who, for instance, have arthritis, that when we take tomatoes out of their diet, or we ask them to peel and de-seed their tomatoes, or we ask them to pressure cook their tomatoes, that the problem goes away. I've got a fascinating nurse that I talk about in The Plant Paradox from Oregon who loved tomato and zucchini relish, and she actually canned it every year. And she had horrible migraine headaches, and she had heard me on the internet, and we saw her as a patient, and I said, wow, this is easy, stop eating your relish, your zucchini and tomato relish, and your migraines will go away. And so she does, and her migraines go away. And so she said, this is great. So we actually have become good friends. And she, a couple of years into this, goes, hey, I really miss my zucchini and tomato relish. I said, let's do a great experiment. Can some of your zucchini and tomatoes the regular way and pressure cook some in the canning process and do the experiment. So she does, and she eats her pressure cooked stuff, and she doesn't have any problems. And I said, okay, let's do the experiment. Eat your regular canned stuff. Calls me the next day. She says, oh, splitting migraine. Why did I do that? And I said, well, thank you for the
thank you for the thank you for the feedback and the research. Wow, that's incredible. So is this part of just to help myself and others that are listening to this? Is that all in the energy paradox, or do you really have to start at kind of the plant paradox?
No, so the energy paradox includes a summary.
Okay, so it's summarized. So if you're recommending something for somebody starting, or even like Richard, myself, that have some obviously very limited knowledge, but still some knowledge, really the energy paradox would be kind of the next
place to start.
A good place to start and be well rounded.
Each time I write a new book, I actually didn't plan on writing the energy paradox, except that I was going into LA to do a PBS promotion, to make some money for public television. And the person who we were going to do the segment with, I get a call that this person, who was a millennial, wasn't going to be able to come in today because she didn't have the energy to come in and do the program. And I'm going, well, gee, what are we going to do? And they said, well, you're halfway here. Don't worry. We'll have another person, film the segment with you. But, she just didn't have it in her to come to work today. And I thought about that for several days. I go, this is amazing. This is, a 30-something woman who doesn't have it in her to come to work. And I'm going, well, how could that be? And I realized that we're really in an energy crisis of really our own making. And so I wrote the book to teach people that this is fixable.
Right. And so this is what you do. I mean, obviously, you were a heart surgeon first, and there's, a lot of prestige and wealth and doors opening, for you in that space, obviously, but then you've actually switched your practice over, if I'm hearing you right, and you're really just focused on really gut health, microbiome, energy, health over. And so you've changed literally your diet and the diet, I'm assuming, of hundreds, if not thousands of other people. And this is, I'm truly fascinated. That's why I don't fake enthusiasm. No, Richard's been with me long enough to know.
The plant paradox has been translated into 36 foreign languages.
Right.
There's millions of copies of these books in circulation. And,
I think we have it at our house, actually. My wife has read it, I believe. Yeah.
It's funny, speaking of dietitians, when I first opened my practice here, we had a company called Berkeley Heart Labs, which is really one of the pioneers in looking at real cholesterol numbers and other things. And they said, you're such a good user of our labs. Would you like if we had a dietitian in your office and she could kind of help you teach people what to eat? And I said, I said, well, I can't afford to pay her. I can't afford to pay myself. And they said, no, free. Part of our service. And I said, oh, that'd be great. So she comes and she walks. I said, just follow me around and, you'll learn the system. And she walks into my administrative assistant after a few days. She says, I can't stay here. This is blasphemy, what he's telling everybody. This goes against everything I've ever learned.
Right.
And my administrative assistant said, I'll tell you what, why don't you just keep quiet, watch him for a couple of weeks, and maybe your mind will be changed. So not only did she stay, but she stayed with me for many years, and we're still very close. She retired. And she gave me a Christmas card the first year that she was here. She said, thank you for letting me see miracles every day.
Nice.
And that's actually why I see patients 6 days a week, because it's not a day goes by that, I get to see what I would have thought was a miracle. But it's not. It's Hippocrates said that all living creatures have, it's really hokey. It translates to green life force energy. out of Greek. Sounds very Californian. And I still get to, even though I'm a Californian now for years, I still get to use my Midwest laugh at the Californians. So all organisms has a green life force energy that wants perfect health for that organism. But Hippocrates believed that there were external factors that were keeping this green life force energy from expressing itself. And the physician's job was to be a detective and figure out what external factors were keeping that from manifesting itself and remove them, teach the patients to remove this. And then the doctor didn't have to do anything else because the patient would heal him or herself. And Hippocrates was absolutely right. So I get to watch this in action. All I do is tell people, get this stuff away and you'll do the rest. And it's just, I see patients who I was literally taking to the operating room to do a bypass surgery for 5 vessels that were blocked. And one of them in particular, who I've written about, he was really nervous being wheeled into the operating room. And I stopped the stretcher and I said, this isn't a good idea. And he said, I'm just scared to death. I don't think I'm going to make it. And I said, look, I'm old enough to know that I should take this seriously. And he says, isn't there any other way? And I said, well, if you become my best patient, I promise you I will never operate on you. And he says, okay, I'll take it. I'll do it. I'll do anything. This was a guy who was getting wheeled into surgery for 5 vessel bypass. It's now been 18 years. He was a diabetic. He had high cholesterol. He had high blood pressure. We're celebrating his 18th anniversary of not having heart surgery. He's not a diabetic. He's on no medications. His stress tests are gorgeous. And, it's like, wow.
I guess why isn't this more known, I guess?
Sickness is really good for business.
I was going to say there's not a lot of profitability in education for
there is no profitability. Just ask my wife. We went through some incredibly lean times. We went through all of our savings, all of our retirement programs, and
really,
we met with bankruptcy attorneys, and that's actually how I started working on weekends. I said, my wife said, are you sure that this is what you got to do? Can't you go slice a few people open again?
Right.
Please.
Right.
And I said, no, this is right. And I go, look what's happening. Look what's happening. Look what's happening to us. But we got through it. And and now, I'm busy and, the lean times are thankfully in the past, but, and you go, what an idiot. Why do that? But again, when you see these,
I respect the heck out of that.
I do too.
I don't think, idiot is not the word I would use at all ever when I would be describing what you did. I mean, we talk about the hero's journey and the dark night of the soul and kind of coming back and having to face your demons. And it sounds like you have experienced that firsthand for your beliefs, for what you believed in, but more than for what you believed in, for what was actually happening, right? You were actually seeing what really was working. And so I commend that.
I do too.
We talk about that a lot at Next Level Method, but really how do we help empower other people to realize it? And I think it's only through stories like this. In fact, I know we're running out of time today, but certainly I would love to have you commit to come back and tell more of that story, if you wouldn't mind, for our listeners, because I would really love, I would literally love to spend an hour with you just diving into that journey and what brought you there. Because I think that's critical for people to understand that it is hard when you have something you strongly believe in and you're seeing positive results in the world. Life isn't just going to be like poof, there you go. You're an instant star, and you're gonna. That's not the real world. That's not. I mean, yeah, you win the lottery and some stuff like that, but even lottery winners end up, usually defeated in that,
usually.
right? So I would love to have you back on. Just if nothing, I'd love to explore this more, 110%. But I would also like to tie in your actual story of kind of how you got there even more, and some of this stuff that you had to overcome, because I think that's very intriguing to me anyway.
Yeah, because I'm looking at a man who's tapped into his purpose, and you stayed with it through that dark night of the soul. That's impressive, and you're doing great work. I mean, I'm going to go get the energy paradox today, because I mean, these are real things that me and my wife are struggling with.
Right. And I think everybody's struggling with.
And
right?
We're in our 50s.
Now at my supplement food company, Gundry MD, we do surveys, and it's interesting. The number one complaint on our surveys, over 60% of people complain of no energy.
Right. I know that's it's in our household. I mean, me and my wife every day is like, oh, I'm so tired.
Right. Exactly.
Tired.
Yeah.
So
tired.
And
then quite frankly, at age 50, I was a whole lot more tired than I am now. And
yeah, it's amazing. I'm looking at
nothing else. Like I say, I'm 71 years old and work 7 days a week and don't take a break. And every day, thank goodness, I'm like a kid in a candy store, as I get to see a pretty cool thing happen almost every day.
Amazing.
We're running out of time here, but I definitely would love to commit you to come back, Doc, because there's so much stuff.
Yeah, let's do it. My wife hates me to tell the story, because in a way she doesn't like to deal with those times, but I think it is. I think it is useful.
I think it's super important. I think it's super important because it's just part of the journey of, if you want to call it success. You could call it success. I kind of, to your point, significance and purpose. I mean, when you're living through, living on purpose, life is going to challenge you. Life is going to come up and say, do you really believe what you believe? Do you really believe?
Are you sure?
Are you super sure? And that's where you see the people that seem, they seem like overnight successes, took 10, 20 years of just them sticking to their beliefs and honing their craft. And then they're the overnight successes. Like, no. This has been going on for decades. Right. Yeah. So I would love to have you come back on.
Yeah, Dr. Gundry, this is amazing. The book is The Energy Paradox. It came out in March. And how Wonderful. Can people connect with you, get in touch with you?
So they can come to my website, drgundry.com. They can come to gundrymd.com. The Dr. Gundry podcast, wherever you get your podcasts. I've got 2 YouTube channels. You can find me on Instagram. Hopefully I pop up on some internet site that you are waving at you in one way or another. So if you haven't found me, I'm doing something wrong. But,
sounds like you're pretty active out there on social media. That's awesome.
You got a great presence, and man, what an honor to have you on the show.
Yes.
Thanks for coming on. I wish we had a little more time, but we'll do this again soon. But thanks for coming on.
All right, and we'll talk about Midwest family values.
We'd love that. Yeah. I'd love that.
And you need to come back. I mean, your reason why you probably saw a bankruptcy lawyer because you're still living in California. You need to live in Kansas or back to Nebraska.
Back to Nebraska.
Good point. I need to visit my shrine in my high school.
There you go.
Doc, thanks for coming on the show. It was a real pleasure. Thank you.
Hey, thanks a lot for having me. And we'll come back on and talk about perseverance or whatever.
I love that.
Hey, thanks for tuning in to the Next Level Method podcast. If you found some value in this, tell somebody about the show. Tell your friends, tell your spouse, tell your kids, let them know all about Next Level Method. And go to nextlevelmethod.com to learn more and join our community. Thanks for tuning in.